Brian Norcross for the latest analysis on this advisory. Brian, is it surprising we're still at a hurricane?
Yeah, it did surprise me, and I've been caught by this before. Looking at these nighttime satellite pictures, you just can't see the details sometimes. And the hurricane hunters went out there. They looked very closely. They found actually lower pressure a half hour ago, and then the pressure went up a little bit. So the Hurricane Center opting to stay with a hurricane for now, and then we'll just see it. I mean, take a look at the latest advisory. We'll give it to you here. You see 75-mile-per-hour winds. There's that pressure. That's sort of an average pressure of the measurements that the hurricane hunters found over the last hour or so, and still moving to the north at 7 miles an hour. And so we still have this track that moves kind of the north and then the northeast. Notice the Hurricane Center, this is as of their 5 o'clock advisory, so we don't get a new cone until 11 o'clock, but as of the 5 o'clock advisory, still thinking that it may weaken a little bit and then strengthen again later in the weekend, and then be at hurricane strength before it comes ashore. This 65 here is actually as it starts to weaken because the center has come ashore and more of the circulation's over land and the friction begins to take over there. So interestingly, this is why it's why we pay them the big bucks there in Miami to analyze this and analyze all this information, and they made the judgment that even though this is a messy looking thing on the satellite, still has a fairly low pressure with the center right in there and creeping along to the north, that what's happening with that relatively low pressure is that the energy is just being spread out in a bigger and bigger way, and the peak winds in the storm here somewhere are still at 75 miles per hour. We still have to talk about the size of it, and we're getting indications of the tropical storm force winds just impinging on the Florida coast tonight and then kind of shrinking down a little bit before it starts to really grow here. This is late on Saturday, just fringing the Carolina coast there with those tropical storm force winds, and then you see the size of it growing and growing to where 6 a.m. on Monday morning now we're getting those high winds there into the northeast. So that analysis there of the winds and how much it's going to grow and when they're going to impact the coast, that's all going to be done here in the next few hours by the Hurricane Center, and a new version of that will come out at 11 o'clock as just more and more information comes in. But fundamentally, the storm is on track, and it is still expected to be this massive all-time, in terms of what we've ever seen, kind of windstorm turning from the ocean and coming ashore and pushing a lot of water up against the coast. All right, talking about the coast, Jim Cantore is along the coast in Florida, just north of West Palm Beach on Singer Island. Jim, so, you can get trapped by looking at those infrared satellite pictures, and the hurricane hunters don't lie. That's what we have them for.
Right, and as we always say, there's not much difference between 75 miles an hour and 70, quite frankly. So, it's 5 miles an hour. Brian, I wanted to ask you this. Have we done anything in terms of telling our viewers how long of a duration these tropical storm winds and these strong winds are going to be accompanying places, let's say, for example, like New York or Philly or Hartford or even D.C. for that matter?
Well, we probably need to get there, Jim. We showed there the tropical update a few minutes ago, the wind analysis from the models, right, where the models actually predict where the strongest winds are and when they're going to move in. And it really lines up with the Hurricane Center forecast, not surprisingly, where the winds start on Sunday down in the mid-Atlantic and then get to the big cities of the Northeast early on Monday and then just pick up through the day so that they peak in the late Monday, early Tuesday time frame, and then, of course, only slowly go down through Wednesday in the whole area. So it's just they start a little earlier farther south, but then it's pretty uniform because the storm is kind of heading more westerly, and so it doesn't get any farther away from any one spot, unlike when it moves up the coast.
Right, that's just mind-boggling. When you're talking about 24, 36, maybe even 48 hours of tropical storm force winds. Plus, Brian, it's going to be interesting to see how this whole movie unfolds, because as we're bringing in those winds, we are also bringing in very heavy tropical rain. Some of these forecast models are producing, almost a foot of rain with this thing coming ashore.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about this storm, that one of the number of things, but one of the things, and probably the most important thing that makes it unprecedented, if it comes together as is forecast, and we don't see any reason why it won't, is that it is originating in the tropics. right? We've seen storms curve in like this and become big snowstorms, but they didn't originate in the tropics and bringing all that tropical moisture north and then mixing it with this cold front and this cold pocket of air aloft that's coming and converging on the northeast. That is the unprecedented piece that I think is the most important, is the nature of the system that's going to mix together to become this big windstorm for the northeast.
And of course, as you add rain and you add wind, that means power outages, trees down, and certainly just massive delays in terms of airport traffic and mass transportation as well. This is going to be something that's going to shut down the Northeast potentially for a couple of days, maybe even longer. We're just going to have to wait and see. The good news is we have so much faith in these models these days, and the technology has come so far that we can prepare people ahead of time. I mean, Brian, imagine 10 years ago this scenario coming undone. We wouldn't believe it.
Yeah,
and we wouldn't have time to prepare people as well as we are now.
We really didn't believe it when all this started, Jim. When we first saw this on the models, we didn't believe it because it's so unusual and we just don't see things like this. But it is because we have such agreement now in these models that they're focusing there on the northeastern part of the country with this massive storm, all the models, independent models. That's why we have this confidence.
All right, Brian, always appreciate that insight. Guys, much more to come on Sandy. Still a hurricane, maybe not for longer. But the problem is it's going to be a lot worse before it's better.
Breaking now, a brand new picture tonight as President Obama gets an update on the ongoing response to Hurricane Sandy. He got the briefing from FEMA, the National Hurricane Center, and Homeland Security. Crystal?
Gearing up for what could be an unprecedented storm, and want to show you what we have right now as far as the latest on Hurricane Sandy. We just had a new advisory come out from the National Hurricane Center. We still have a Category 1 hurricane. Winds are sustained at 75 miles per hour, maximum sustained winds. Notice how far the storm is reaching into the east coast of Florida. Some of those outer bands still bringing rain into the coastline. We have strong winds. The winds, tropical storm force winds expected along the coast. That's why we have tropical storm warnings out. Dangerous rip currents, big waves, and then notice with the track, it looks like the storm's going to head directly to the north, but it actually veers to the northeast. It gets pulled away from the coastline, and all of the modeled trends are taking it east in the short term, in the short time frame as we head into Saturday. So that means we'll still see some of the impacts along the coastline as far as rip currents, big waves, some of that wind coming in. But then look what happens. The storm gets pulled right into the area from the mid-Atlantic to New England. Now, it's a matter of where the center will go, but that doesn't mean a whole lot because this is such a big storm. The massive width of the circulation is going to produce a much wider scope of impacts than if this were a tiny storm. And it could actually even strengthen into a strong hurricane by the time it moves in, Category 1, and then impact and come into play with another storm. So there's a big scenario we need to break down for you coming up for the Northeast. And we've got a game in Jacksonville tomorrow afternoon. It looks like it will be rainy and windy with temperatures in the 70s as the Bulldogs take on the Gators. Reynolds?
Remember, folks, this is going to be a massive system, and it's important to be prepared for days of power outages. Here's our hurricane specialist, Dr. Brian Norcross, with what you need to have right now.
Today is the day to get ready, and this is what you need to do. First thing, when you head out today, get some gas in your car, fill it up, because if the power goes out, those gas pumps may not work. Now let's talk about staying home. The most important thing you've got to have is water, and there are two parts to that. One is you need to have water to drink just in case something happens to the water supply, which isn't likely, but just in case, so get a few bottles of water. The other thing is your refrigerator. Put the water in plastic bags like this and then stuff them in the freezer, every little corner of your freezer. That way, the water will be there when you need it, but also it'll keep your refrigerator colder for longer. Get yourself some food for the rest of the week. Get something the kids will like. Get some bread, things that are non-perishable. You need that. While you're out, get yourself some cash because the ATMs aren't going to work when the power goes out. Get yourself a first aid kit if you don't have one, just in case. Get yourself some batteries and be sure you have flashlights. If the power is out for an extended period of time, you're going to need the flashlights in the dark. Now, communications. The cell phone is not likely to be your friend if your power's out for a long time. You know how long your cell phone lasts. So be sure you have a car charger so at least you can keep it going, assuming the cell service works. If the cell service in your area doesn't work, you need a battery-operated TV or radio. Be sure you have lots and lots of batteries. That's essential. And don't forget the kids. Get some games because they may have to be occupied at home for days. One more thing, it's going to be cold after this storm. Be sure you have a blanket. You're going to need that. There are other things you need to be aware of. We have all that on weather.com, so check it out. That's it. Back to you.
Great tips, and we continue to stress just how dangerous Sandy's winds will be when they start to hit the coast, particularly in the major cities of the Northeast.
Especially places like New York City. And you remember, it's concentration of skyscrapers in between the buildings. Storm's winds can get significantly stronger. Our severe weather expert, Dr. Greg Forbes, explains why.
By sticking up into the wind, tall skyscrapers can deflect the wind and create some accelerations around the buildings. It's what we call a Bernoulli effect. It's kind of like squeezing a tube of toothpaste. That squeezing causes the toothpaste to squirt out faster. We get jets of strong winds. Now, if the buildings are pretty far apart, like in this case, you might not get too much of that squirting effect, but you might get a little bit of an eddy or a little bit of a whirlwind behind the buildings. But if the skyscrapers are pretty close together, you might get a wind tunneling effect because of that squeezing of the air from around both of the buildings in between them. It might get strong enough, in fact, that you might even pull some of the windows out of the buildings and channel some of those strong gusts down to the ground. It's what we call the microclimate within the urban environment. Back to you.
Thanks, Dr. Forbes. We'll be right back with more expert analysis from Dr. Greg Postel. Keep it right here.
Welcome back to the Weather Channel. We're going to send it over to Crystal and Dr. Greg Postel in the Global Forecast Center for an in-depth look at Hurricane Sandy.
That's right. More in-depth analysis with our experts, which we'll have for you throughout the night. We have the new advisory now from the National Hurricane Center. And, Greg, we still have a hurricane on our hands, Hurricane Sandy. But when you look at this on satellite, it doesn't look very organized, but you can still see how big this storm is, right?
Huge. I mean, it is unbelievable. Let's look at this satellite picture to show you the scale we're dealing with. I mean, the center of the storm is actually, center of Hurricane Sandy is right about there, and we're talking hundreds and hundreds of miles. In fact, I was just looking at some observations that show the wind is going around Sandy about this much, so we can see how big it is. We have northerly winds at the surface over the Gulf of Mexico and southerly winds way out here. That's about how big the circulation is. This is tremendous. And part of the reason why it is so big is because now it's being sort of absorbed or being part of now this jet stream energy that we've been talking about coming into play. And looking at this water vapor image, this is showing you areas where it's really dry in the areas of orange and dark and the moist areas in green and white. And what's happening here is what we're seeing is a jet stream that's coming around like this, and it's really getting involved, and it's going right over the top of Sandy. And this is part of the jet stream energy that it's sort of getting absorbed in or being a part of, and that's part of the process of it getting bigger.
So we don't think that dry air will do a whole, I mean, it may weaken it over time, right? But it's kind of helping to stretch it out, right?
It is. In fact, it has weakened it. I mean, really, because we were dealing with this system over the last 48 hours. It's really, you know, sort of been on this decline, at least in terms of a hurricane in its very small scale. But it's transitioning. So this dry air has really gotten in and interfered with the whole tropical process. Now it's becoming this complex system that is a lot bigger and still has got some strong winds in there. We were at 75 miles per hour. This is the latest advisory, 8 o'clock from the Hurricane Center. Let's show you the track. And you notice that it will very soon, within the matter of hours, overnight tonight, start to turn toward the northeast and then parallel the coast, but then it will turn back to the west. And, you know, we've been talking about why is this going to turn to the west? We don't normally see that with tropical systems moving north in the Atlantic. It seems like they always go back to the east. This one's going to the west. Let's look at why. And a lot of it has to do with the upper level pattern that is going to be in place early next week, and that will involve a very large upper level ridge of high pressure that's here in the high latitudes in eastern Canada, and that has a clockwise flow around it that is like this. And so that is going to be steering Sandy, which will be up in here early next week, back toward the west.
Somewhere between the mid-Atlantic and southern New England. We can't pinpoint the center, but again, remember how large this storm is. That's not going to be, I mean, that's going to make a difference, obviously, with the storm surge and whatnot, but we are going to have far-reaching impacts. I think Brian Norcross talked about this as a hybrid powerhouse because of the jet stream and the cold air. It's like two storms coming together.
That's absolutely right. We're going to have impacts, strong winds, and coastal problems all the way from Maine down to North Carolina because it is such a big storm, and that is about where we're going to have to deal with a lot of these impacts early next week.
We'll talk about the wet snow, heavy wet snow potential coming up, and more on these impacts. Maria?
I'm meteorologist Maria LaRosa in the Content Creation Center. And first off, we want to thank you so much for sending us all of those great pictures and videos as Sandy moved through the Caribbean, now taking aim on Florida, eventually pushing into the mid-Atlantic and the Northeast. You have been our eyes and ears on the ground. We really appreciate it. We need more, though. We want to keep that going. Here's how you can help us continue to tell that Sandy story. Just email the pictures or the videos to eyewitness@weather.com or through the Weather Channel app on your smartphone. You can even share them on Facebook and Google+, or tweet them to us on Twitter. Remember, utmost importance, of course, your safety. So when you're out there taking those shots, recording that video, do so safely. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Maria. You know, millions of you have been going to weather.com for some of the very latest weather information, and for good reason. There's so much you can glean from this website. It's just amazing. Obviously, you can get the very latest from Hurricane Sandy. You can get reports live from the field from Mike Seidel and others. You get the very latest on what happened with it, not only today, but what happened days ago in places like Cuba. You can see what it did in the may and you can also see what it may mean for millions of people. But there's a new feature that we've just added to this. We added a few months ago. We want to remind you of it. It's an amazing feature where you can actually follow your friends. We live in a day and age with social media. So many of you engage in Twitter. So many of you like Facebook. Well, you can use Facebook to keep in track with what friends might be exposed to the elements with this particular system. In fact, it's very easy to do. You just sign up right here. It's easy. Go to the website and you will simply log in. You enter your information for Facebook and you can really keep track of your friends and see which may be affected by this system as Sandy chugs its way to the north. Okay, folks, our coverage with Hurricane Sandy continues all weekend long, and tomorrow morning you can get the very latest with a special Saturday edition of Wake Up with Al. Al and Stephanie Abrams will be live in Delaware starting at 6 a.m.
Past the hour now. All right, take a look at this map. This shows you where power outages are possible and likely from Hurricane Sandy.
Our team of hurricane specialists say right now is the time to prepare for widespread, prolonged outages from North Georgia all the way to New England.
We have the weekend to get ready. I guess that's the good news. The impacts of Hurricane Sandy will be far-reaching and will affect as many as 50 million people in the coming days. Good evening. I'm Crystal Egger.
And I'm Reynolds Wolf. Welcome to this extended edition of Weather Center Live. Our team of veteran meteorologists say they've never seen anything like this historic storm in the making, potentially historic storm in the making. Let's go ahead and kick things off with our hurricane specialist, Dr. Greg Postel.
Yeah, thanks, guys. We are dealing with a situation that continues to behave as expected, and we're going to continue to deal with a significant storm moving up the coast. Latest advisory from the Hurricane Center has it as Hurricane Sandy, a 75-mile-per-hour storm. That's as of 8 o'clock. Center right now is about 200 miles east of the coast of Florida, bringing some heavy rain showers and some gusty winds all along the coast. Let's look at some of these wave heights that we've got here. 20 to 30 feet offshore underneath where the center of the circulation is, right about here. Still large waves coming on shore, getting very close to the coast of the Carolinas, just offshore of Florida, 18 to 20-foot waves there. And what we've got here are the winds along the coast, all about 15 to 25 miles an hour, but earlier today we saw gusts up to 40 and 50 miles per hour there. Those winds will be increasing very likely on the Carolina coast in the next 12 to 24 hours as well out of the north. Most often they will be offshore, so that is good news for them. Let's look at the wind field with Hurricane Sandy right now. These areas shaded in yellow, tropical storm force sustained winds tonight, and they will be moving northward and expanding. This is one of the critical things to keep in mind with this storm, is that the radius of tropical storm force sustained winds will grow and likely brush the coast midnight Sunday night, and the hurricane force wind gusts likely staying offshore, fortunately. But then as we move towards Sunday and then during the day later on in Monday, we have a strengthening wind field, and that will expand also and then include parts of the northeast. So here's one of the forecasts from the European Center. This model is showing the central pressure, and And these areas in color here are strong winds. The areas in purple are the strongest winds. And notice, even those strong winds, we said to tropical storm force, possibly brushing the coast on Sunday. But the European center, which is much like many of the other models, brings the center of the circulation on Tuesday morning to the Jersey coast. North of where that center crosses the coast, that is where the highest wave action and coastal problems will be. Very strong winds coming inland as well. Very likely hurricane force wind gusts anywhere near where that center comes on shore. And that would likely be late Monday night and early Tuesday morning if this European model verifies. And it's not that different from many of the other models that we've been looking at. So with that, I'm going to bring in Jim Cantori from Singer Island, Florida, to talk about some of these wind impacts that we expect.
Dr. Postel, I want to ask you a question. Number one, two questions here. Number one, what does the 18Z GFS do in terms of landfall point?
It's very similar to the 12Z. It brings it right in, basically, to where the, actually closer to the European. So it is in this general area, you know, in the New Jersey, New York area. Bring it in toward the, from the east toward the west. So there's really no new insight that we can gain from that other than that is confirmation of what we've been thinking that was going to happen all along. Wow, so the 2 p.m. brings it in closer to the European solution than the 12 or the 7 a.m., which brought it up toward Narragansett Bay in Rhode Island. That's right. That's interesting. So now we've got a lot more consensus. Wow, I did not. I've been out here doing live shots all day, so I don't know. All right, second question is let's talk about these wind impacts. And even if we do not get a hurricane force gust, explain to our viewers why the duration, which could be 24 to 48 hours of tropical storm force winds, is just as, if not more important. Well, what the trees, a lot of the trees have the leaves on them, and the soil will be wet. We'll have prolonged rain, so the constant wind action, the stress on these trees will likely work on them and eventually bring many of them down, and that's going to cause a lot of problems with power outages as well. We expect a very large area in the northeastern corridor, in the I-95 corridor, all the way from D.C. northward, you know, to Boston, likely to have a lot of power outages, lots of trees down, with the very large wind field, the expanse of this wind energy that we expect to be associated with Sandy when in fact the center does finally cross the coast. And again, as we've been talking all along, it's not, don't focus on the exact track of the center because the storm is so big. In fact, the strongest winds are likely to be displaced from the center by a good distance. So this is one of the many things that we have to keep focused on.
And it's kind of interesting because, I mean, now you've also got this potential 800-mile long or 800-mile diameter wind field, and you're adding tropical rain. Remember, this is a tropical originating system, so it's got deep tropical moisture, and so, you know, 2 inches, 4 inches, 8 inches, 12 inches of rain possible in some of these areas. So, you know, you may not lose power for that first 12 or 24 hours, but by the time we kick in toward 30, maybe even 36, that's when it may go. Yeah, and maybe because of the water. The soil will get progressively moist, more moist, and that will make it easier and easier for trees to come down with time. And the other thing I want to mention, and I'll talk about this in a later tropical update too, is the potential for some winter weather on the backside of the system. Yes. You know, Jim, this is going to be bringing in and tying itself to a very strong jet stream aloft over the northeastern part of the country. Now, the snow is not going to make it to the coast. I'm not talking about the big cities. I'm talking about the higher elevation. Yes, exactly. To the west, like the mountains of West Virginia, higher terrain of western Maryland, perhaps. And some of the model data that I've seen is put out 1 to 2 feet of snow accumulation there. Now, contrast that and add to that the very strong winds that we expect to go all that far inland. That is going to make blizzard-like conditions potentially in those higher elevations of the mountains, but in a very small area. Again, not anywhere near the highly populated regions on the coast. These are in the mountainous areas. So and quite frankly, isn't that the true perfect storm? A winter storm with a nor'easter with a hurricane. Absolutely. Absolutely unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. To talk about skiing in West Virginia and Maryland before the Rockies. Wow.
40 past the hour now in this extended edition of Weather Center Live. There are a lot of anxious eyes watching Sandy as the storm heads closer to the U.S. Places all along the East Coast are on high alert.
You know what? Let's go straight to NBC's Danielle Lee. She's actually live in Chesapeake Beach, Maryland. She's got a closer look at preparations ahead of this potentially historic storm.
Hi, Reynolds and Crystal. Here in Chesapeake Beach, people are not wasting time. If you look, I'm standing on a restaurant patio, and it's empty. That's because they have brought all of the furniture in ahead of the storm. And if you look behind me, you may be able to see several empty slips on that dock. This afternoon, we saw several people out there checking on their boats, many bringing them to safer areas. They know that while this storm is a couple days away, now is the time to prepare.
Strong winds, rain, and a rising surf from Hurricane Sandy are already lashing out on the Florida coast. There, a jet skier caught in the surf needed rescue. Across the Caribbean, Sandy has left dozens of people dead. It rips through houses, downed trees, and flooded entire communities. Models have the storm smashing right into the Northeast in days.
Common sense says you should start taking precautions. Get ready just in case. This is a potentially dangerous storm.
Emergency workers say anyone from Virginia up through New England should get ready now. On Long Island, New York, we found people filling up sandbags. In Manchester, Connecticut, homeowners were preparing to lose power, snatching up generators, flashlights, and batteries.
I'd rather spend the money on the generator and know that I have heat and a full fridge of food for my 2 kids.
In Sussex County, Delaware, boaters pulled their vessels out of the water. In Maryland, coastal restaurants emptied their patios. Sandy is expected to bring unusually high tides, intense waves, and coastal flooding. Further inland, it could down trees and knock out power. Energy companies are already calling for backup.
All of the utilities have reached out beyond our borders and put contracts in place already from as far away as Washington State.
Memories of Hurricane Irene last year that left billions in damage have people determined not to get caught off guard.
And speaking of moving boats to safety, you may be able to see one yacht behind me just moving out of this dock now. People not wanting to risk their prized possessions getting ruined in this storm. Several states have declared emergencies. The National Guard is gearing up, ready to rescue anyone that does need help. And people are being told to prepare for the worst, possibly 5 to 7 days without power and the loss of fresh water. Reporting live in Chesapeake Beach, Maryland, I'm Danielle Lee. Now back to you.
Okay, Danielle, thanks so much.
We want to bring in our hurricane specialist, Dr. Greg Postel, right now for more expert analysis. Greg, I have a question for you. As we watch Sandy right now as a hurricane on the satellite, you see a lot of convection on the western edge of the storm, the left quadrant, if you will. Is there any chance, I mean, it looks like it's making a beeline for South Carolina, if not North Carolina. We're pretty confident this is going to veer east, right?
The center will, and that's the important thing to keep in mind. The center will turn toward the east, but because this is such a big storm, there will be impacts on the Carolinas. There's no doubt about that. Conditions will likely deteriorate just at least a little bit anyway from what they are now on the Carolina coast for the next 24 to 36 hours. So I'll talk about that right now, actually. Let's look at the satellite and just see how big the storm is. So, you know, Crystal, you were mentioning, the center is right here, and you were talking about those clouds. It almost looks as though they were kind of expanding off in that direction. That's not the motion of the hurricane. Those are just some clouds and some rain showers that are being sort of spun out away from where the center is, and that's where the center, and we do think with high confidence that it is going to turn toward the northeast and parallel the Carolina coast. So let's look at the wind field, though. This is how huge a storm it is. This is this evening, and this is where the center is, and we're starting to see tropical storm force winds all the way out here. Still some tropical storm force gusts along the Florida coast. But I'm going to move forward in time here and show you what the Carolinas can expect over the next 24 to 36 hours. By midnight, Saturday night, early Sunday morning, Sandy will be right about here. It's not clear whether it'll be a hurricane or a tropical storm yet, but it doesn't matter. It'll be a 70 to 80 mile per hour storm. And this is the expanse of the tropical storm force winds. They could be brushing there, the Carolinas. And with the wind coming around like that, you got to keep in mind that there will be some onshore flow of water from the ocean into the Carolinas. Let's look at some of the storm surge products that we have here developed by Michael Lowry. This is from Michael Lowry, a hurricane specialist, one of them, and a storm surge expert, and showing that we have on Sunday a 3 to 5 foot surge likely in the Cape Hatteras area and in the Albemarle Sound all the way northeastward to the coastal Virginia. And so this is just the beginning of a long duration event with huge impacts. Back to you guys.
Okay, folks, here's a quick look at Cocoa Beach, Florida. We'll see you in a few.
Well, it's 50 past the hour, time for your tropical update. I'm hurricane specialist Dr. Greg Postel with the latest on Hurricane Sandy and where it's going to go. And right now it is offshore. The center is offshore Florida by a couple of 100 miles. Center being right about here for Hurricane Sandy. And we're starting to see what I plotted here on top of the satellite is the wave heights from some buoys around the area. We have some 30-foot wave heights here, not very far away from where the center is, and closer to the coast. These aren't the breaking waves on shore, of course, but these are just offshore. 18 to 20-foot waves there off the coast of Florida, 9-foot here just off the coast of Georgia. So very large seas are being generated right now. And with the center of circulation right about there, you might look at this and you think, okay, well, it doesn't look very healthy with a lot of these cloud cover here and a lot of the thunderstorm activity north of the center. That is true, but this is expected. This is what we expected to happen with this storm as it's beginning to acquire now some non-tropical characteristics. It's beginning to ingest some strong winds aloft, and that is actually ultimately down the road may help it strengthen once again, just a little bit, not a whole lot, but a little bit. So we got to keep in mind. But what it's going to do is make it much bigger and have much broader impact. So we also have to keep that in mind as well. Now, what we're going to show here is some close-up winds and wind speed, sustained winds, some gusts on the Florida coast, generally about 10 to 20 miles per hour with gusts to 30. Earlier they had gusts in the 40 to 50 mile per range. And keep in mind, that's with the center of circulation over 200 miles offshore. So you can get the sense that the winds extend to the west by quite a bit. And then looking at the radar, the impacts are not just with the rain and some of the high seas there, but also some rain showers, some heavy rain showers coming on board here, not far from Daytona Beach here. Strong gusty winds undoubtedly in this area of red shading where the heaviest rain showers are. We're not seeing any lightning just yet, but definitely some heavy rain showers. And it's in these heavier rain showers that some of the stronger wind gusts will be. Again, with the center of circulation way out here, that's not going to get any closer to the Florida coast, we don't think. So tomorrow, for example, in Jacksonville, we expect a chance of showers. That will likely be early in the day, later on in the day, as Sandy moves off to the northeast in that general direction. We think that conditions will improve later on in the day in Jacksonville for some very important football game action going on there. And here's the cone from the Hurricane Center. We have it moving toward the northeast, paralleling the coast later on in the weekend. Notice the official forecast has it for a 65-mile-per-hour tropical storm. That's a strong tropical storm on Saturday. But then it regained some of its intensity up to a 80-mile-per-hour Category 1 in here. Some of that may have to do with the fact that the system will be moving over the Gulf Stream, which is actually a very warm pool of water that's right out here. It's a river of water that's actually flowing out in this direction. Sandy will cross that again early next week, and that may give it a little bit more energy, a little bit of a boost. But it's not all about the sea surface temperatures. It's got to have some help from the atmosphere aloft, and it will, and that's why we think it will intensify just a little bit once again early next week. But let's have a look at some of the timing impacts for Saturday along the Carolinas. The rain will increase generally on Saturday with the winds 20 to 30, gusts to 40 along the coast in particular, and then moving northward from there along the Virginia, North Carolina coast, Delaware coast. Winds may gust to 50 on Sunday, and then this area expands to include areas all the way from North Carolina to Maine, and that will have gusts potentially to 75 miles per hour all along the area. And we think the center is likely going to come ashore somewhere, perhaps south of New York City, very close to it, with and that will pose all kinds of coastal flooding and beach erosion, certainly north of where the center makes landfall, and a lot of power outages. Let me just show you a quick graphic here, which will show you where the center is forecasted to be by the two models, the two main ones. The GFS has it moving across Long Island and toward the southwest on Tuesday morning. The ECMWF has it offshore the Jersey coast moving west. Both of these models have the hurricane moving toward the west. So that is unusual, and that is one of the rare things about this storm that will likely bring a lot of water into the region, especially north of where the center makes landfall, and that's as depicted by these two X's. So with that, we'll continue our coverage with Sandy. Back to you guys in the studio.
Thank you, Dr. Greg Postel. We want to go in more depth about some of the impacts, and we'll start with the rain threat across the Northeast. Now, we could locally see as much as 10 inches or more. We're talking about coastal areas getting nailed with that threat for storm surge, but also inland flooding.
Oh, no question. Any place with low-lying areas or spots with poor drainage, the water's going to pile up. And this is something that, Crystal, you've been talking about. We all have been. This is going to be a long-duration event. It's not going to happen just overnight. This could last for days.
Long-duration rain and then long-duration wind, perhaps damaging wind from late Sunday, roughly, as things really get going into Tuesday. So we're looking at some widespread power outages, either possible or or likely, and that area shaded in red. So get prepared now. Our coverage of Hurricane Sandy continues all weekend long. You can tune in tomorrow morning for a special Saturday edition of Wake Up with Al.
That's right. Stephanie Abrams and Al Roker will be live on location in, I hope I said this right, Rehoboth?
Rehoboth?
I hope so.
Rehoboth
It's in Delaware.
Beach.
We'll see you tomorrow morning. They'll see you at 6.
Top of the hour now, we start off with a new view of Hurricane Sandy closing in on the East Coast. Look at the size of this storm. This is what Sandy looks like from space. Monster of a storm. I mean, far-reaching impact.
It is unbelievable, possibly affecting 50 million people. You know, our team of hurricane specialists say right now is the time to prepare for an extended period of power outages. We're talking possibly weeks without power for millions of people from the mid-Atlantic to New England and even inland.
We have exclusive expert analysis you will not get anywhere else. From the Weather Channel headquarters in Atlanta, this is a special extended edition of Weather Center Live. That's right, as many as 50 million people could feel the effects of Hurricane Sandy in the coming days. Good evening, I'm Crystal Ager.
And I'm Reynolds Wolf. Welcome to this extended edition of Weather Center Live. Let's get straight to the exclusive Weather Channel threat index on Hurricane Sandy. Take a look at this for a moment.
This is going to show you where you need to be paying close attention to the storm and some of the impacts in the coming days. Be aware for the east coast of Florida. We're still expecting impacts here over the next 24 hours in the way of dangerous waves and rip currents, gusty winds, and some rain on and off along the coast. And then we've added the Carolinas. You can see that in either aware or alert. And look at this area in the northeast.
That covers a lot of real estate. And then, of course, you have to think about the high elevations of parts of the Appalachians. They're going to be dealing with the strong winds, too. It's rough stuff.
Let's go right to our hurricane specialist, Dr. Greg Postel, and I know you'll explain this. Dr. Postel, it's not just what we're seeing right now with Hurricane Sandy, but what's going to come into play down the road across the Northeast.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the factors are coming together. It's going to be a very widespread, heavy rain, lots of wind with this extended out over hundreds of miles in the Northeast, and then maybe a little bit on the backside in the higher terrain of the Appalachians, a significant snow event. We'll talk about that in the tropical update later on in the program, but let's get to the advisory here. The latest advisories of 8 o'clock. We have Hurricane Sandy, 75 miles per hour, borderline hurricane, 970 on the pressure, moving north at 7 miles an hour. The center of circulation is out here. It's a couple hundred miles east of Florida coast. We're seeing a lot of the shower and thunderstorm activity well to the north of where the low-level center is. That's because we have strong winds aloft that are pushing those thunderstorms in that direction. This is all part of the process that we've been anticipating, sort of this undergoing a transition from being a tropical system where you have the thunderstorms, for the most part, located very close to where the center is, to an extratropical system where you have strong winds aloft and the system is kind of stretched out very long, in long directions, many directions as well. Long distances. So we have hurricanes, because it is so large. Right now we have tropical storm watches and tropical storm warnings in place right now. Here are the tropical storm warnings on the Florida coast. These are the watches. These are also tropical storm watches here for parts of South Carolina, and tropical storm warnings for also parts of northern parts of South Carolina, going all the way up through much of, if not all of, the North Carolina coast. This will have very wide-ranging impacts, even though we don't expect the center to get within a couple hundred miles of the Carolina coast. We still have tropical storm watches and warnings out for the coast. Here we go. Here's a close-in view of that, as well as here all the way up from Savannah to Cape Hatteras. You will have tropical storm wind gusts likely over the weekend. And here's a water vapor imagery that actually doesn't really show it very well. I'm going to have to move this camera just south a little bit so we can see what we're dealing with right here. Again, here's the Florida coast, just for reference, right in there. The center of circulation is right about there. And when I said earlier about this sort of transitioning over to sort of not really an extratropical system, but having parts of an extratropical system involved, that's because we're starting to see the jet stream move in and bring some dry air and do all that kind of things and spread out the system over a very large area. So here we go. The center of circulation is right about there at low levels, and we have this jet stream moving in, and the net effect of all that is going to be to make this a very large storm, and it's already getting that. We actually, in fact, have northerly winds right now at the surface over the Gulf of Mexico, and southerly winds way out here. You can already see it is a huge system. Back to you guys in the studio.
Okay, thanks so much, Dr. Greg Postel. All right, some of the early impacts of this Hurricane Sandy, this immense system, have really been the strong waves on the shores of Florida.
In fact, our storm tracker, Jim Cantori, spoke with a man that's been tracking down some uncovered treasures on the beaches of Singer Island, Florida. Take a look.
Well, tonight here on Singer Island, the impacts of Sandy continue to wane, especially in terms of the wind and the rain. This has really died off, certainly from where it was 12 hours ago. The wave action is still huge behind me here, but with that wave action comes a complete change in the beach and sometimes some pretty nice trinkets. I want to go talk to my friend Dean, who's been out here with a metal detector, and really within just a couple of hours, Dean, you have found some stuff.
I've come up with some nice finds. It's when the sand's getting taken away is when it happens.
So tell me about what you find. Show us some of the stuff here.
Well, if you can see here, I've got me a nice grill.
Is that solid gold?
Yeah.
Or at least gold plated?
Yeah, gold plated.
So how much is that worth?
To the owner, I guess a lot.
Oh yeah. I hate to be missing that.
Yeah.
Hopefully there's not a body attached to it.
Yeah, I don't think so. But got a little Tiffany and Company here, and
oh, wow, look at that.
Hopefully that one's real. My wife will really love that. And then
how many carats do you think?
I have no idea. Hopefully it's
it feels heavy though. It's got some weight.
Yeah,
to it.
Hopefully it's at least 1.5, 2.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Oh, anytime, man. I need the hat though.
But a couple of rings.
Couple rings.
I mean, these are like diamond ring, engagement rings.
Well, this one I think is really an older ring. If you can see, I don't know if you guys or people out there can see, but it's kind of a little on the tarnished side. But the diamond looks to be real, along with some pieces of broke gold chains, another pink.
Oh, pink diamond.
And that's a really small target, though. With you get a decent quality detector. I mean, you can find stuff with a regular detector, but you need a good one.
Dean, thanks for talking to me, buddy.
Well, am I supposed to hand you the gold?
I appreciate that. No, he just shake my hand. All right. I appreciate that. Thank you. Obviously, that's what comes with an ocean storm, folks. You can really find some nice finds, and certainly from what Dean's got there, he may be able to pay the mortgage this month. That's for sure. Back to you.
Some hidden treasures there.
Absolutely.
That diamond was
nice.
Impressive. We're going to be back with more coverage of Hurricane Sandy. Stay tuned.
Well, breaking now, a brand new picture tonight as President Obama gets an update on the ongoing response to Hurricane Sandy. Now, I got the briefing from FEMA, the National Hurricane Center, and Homeland Security. Crystal?
It's going to be a very busy day as we all watch Hurricane Sandy. Busy couple of days, I should say. In getting into the weekend, there's so much to still be decided. We have a very challenging overall weather pattern as this moves into the northeast. But here's where we stand right now. We still have a Category 1 hurricane on our hands. Hurricane Sandy with maximum sustained winds at 75 miles per hour. That's as of the latest advisory from the National Hurricane Center at 8 o'clock Eastern time. We'll have another advisory in the next couple of hours. The storm is moving to the north. That would make you think that maybe this is going to make landfall somewhere in the Carolinas, but it veers away from the shore. The model trends all in agreement that this is going to stay to the east for a while and then eventually curve back in somewhere between the mid-Atlantic region and southern New England. And that's why we're so worried about the northeast, because the models show this actually strengthening again, becoming a Category 1 hurricane before it impacts some of these areas. And we also have a big dip in the jet stream coming in, so it's really a hybrid superstorm that will come together for these areas. Coastal Carolina impacts, we're not out of the woods here. We're still looking at heavy rain, localized areas of flooding, strong wind gusts, 50+ miles per hour, and then also that storm surge along the coast. We're going to have a persistent onshore wind piling up some of that water. And then moving up to the east here, the northeast, Category 1 80-mile-per-hour storm by Monday. That's what the models are forecasting at this time. And here's the track slamming right in to the northeast. A lot more to come as we head through the night. Reynolds?
Crystal, thanks so much. You know, folks, as you might imagine, there are a lot of anxious eyes watching Sandy as the storm gets closer to the United States. Places all along the East Coast are on high alert. Let's go straight right now to NECN reporter Josh Brigadier. He's live in Plymouth, Massachusetts with a much closer look at preparations ahead of this potentially historic storm.
Reynolds, that's what everybody's worried about here, is that it could end up being a big deal in this area. The approach from the southeast is the question here in this part of Plymouth, especially because that's not the protected side here in this bay. So they're wondering about what's going to happen. They're not panicking, but definitely taking precautions. Up the Plymouth Harbor boat ramp and done for the season. They say all good things must come to an end. But even in late October, this is a bit sooner than Fish and Dogs captain Bob Tracy would have wanted to walk his rods and reels off the boat.
Thought it was going to get another 3-4 weeks, but can't chance it, you know.
With Sandy coming in, the harbor master called on all mooring holders to get their boats out by Sunday. Most are following that plan, even if they're doubting what the storm will bring.
I'm not too worried about it. We don't really get much whenever a storm comes, so it's just probably going to be rain.
This late in the year, just 20% or so, approximately 50 boats remain as of the morning. And even though Plymouth Harbor is protected from the northeast by the Army Corps constructed breakwater and the natural beach barrier, there is some exposure.
What we're nervous about is the southeast here in Plymouth, which will, they'll have a bit of a build-up, like a 2-mile area for the storm or the wave action to build up and sort of crash into this end of the harbor.
Not everyone is done for the season. Oyster farmer Sean Withington is heading out for another run on this day. Then a few hours later, he's back with his cages. He's not too concerned by the potential power of Sandy.
If the oysters are on the bottom and growing the way they ought to be, then we're hoping, like all farmers, that they'll survive.
But for recreational fishermen like Bob Tracy, it's far better to be done now than take the risk.
It's a more mental thing than it is. Probably nothing will happen, but I just worry the heck about the boat, you know.
So peace of mind, guys, no question about that. And you see these boats here, these are still in the harbor. The harbor master recommending everybody get their boats out, but a lot of commercial fishermen will not do that. They have stronger moorings and lines, so they will leave their boats in. Everyone else should get their boats out by tomorrow while the weather is still calm here. Reynolds, Crystal, back to you guys.
Okay, thanks so much for that report.
All right, we are covering all of the angles of Hurricane Sandy. In fact, we have a big game tomorrow. College football game. We're watching the weather here in Jacksonville, Florida for you. Notice the winds will be at about 19 miles per hour. So at Reynolds, we are looking at wind and rain. Not terrible, but for tailgaters, could be.
I think it could be raining fire, and people will go to this game.
Right.
Georgia if they win this, they have a good chance of the SEC championship. Florida, of course, trying to get the national championship game. This game is big.
There you go. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the Weather Channel. We're going to give you the very latest on Hurricane Sandy. To do that, we're going to send it over to Crystal and Dr. Greg Postel in the Global Forecast Center for more of an in-depth look at Hurricane Sandy. Guys, take it away.
And Reynolds, there are a few things going on with Sandy that we want to address right now. For one, we are seeing signs of some weakening, but as that happens, the storm is also growing in size, right? It's transitioning.
Yeah, you can actually see that in the satellite right before your very eyes. See how big this system is. The center of circulation is maybe 200 to 250 miles off the Florida coast. But look at the expanse of cloud cover here. It goes all the way from the west coast of Florida all the way out well into the Atlantic. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds of miles across. And in fact, it's not just the clouds, it's the wind around it at low levels. There is a northerly wind in the Gulf of Mexico that's out of the north that's associated with this entire circulation. It's huge. Now, albeit the winds aren't very strong here, but still, you get the sense that we're talking with a beast of a storm.
And Greg, this is not going to get much smaller as it moves up the East Coast.
It's not. And in fact, some of this transitioning that we're talking about has to do with the jet stream becoming involved with it and helping to lower the pressures over a very broad area. And what we're seeing is in this water vapor imagery, this area shows where the dry and moist air are sort of put together, and you can see the dry air is coming in from the west and the south. That's the jet stream that's right now involved. That's one of them. There'll be more later on. But this one, you can see, is really in play right now and helping to sort of expand the system out in many directions. We have winds coming out like that in all directions.
And it's interesting, if you look not too far into the Mississippi area, roughly up across the Tennessee Valley, you see that dip in the jet stream.
There is, that's right. That's another one
that brought snow to Colorado earlier this week.
Right,
this big change in the weather, and that's a big player we've been talking about for this storm.
That's exactly right. That's going to be certainly becoming more and more involved with time. And we can see here on this pattern map, that's the dip in the jet stream, Crystal, that you were talking about. This is for Sunday. So this is a couple days from now. By then, we think Sandy's circulation center will be out here. Of course, the effects will be wide-reaching. It'll have a big circulation like that. But look at the jet stream. This is up, 30,000 feet aloft. This is that dip in the jet stream that you were talking about. That will be be moving to the east coast. There will be another one underneath it like that. And you can see, it doesn't take much imagination to see that these winds are flowing outward away from each other, diverging like that. And that helps to lower the pressure underneath it. So that will help to grow Sandy in size and help maybe trigger some more thunderstorm activity. So that will be a sort of a favorable configuration of upper level winds to help maybe strengthen this thing a little bit again.
And while we're on this is where the storm will be on Sunday. So it's important to point out for the Carolinas and the Mid-Atlantic, you know, we are going to see impacts here before landfall. This is such a big storm.
Absolutely.
So, you know, with the wind and the storm surge and the rain, you know, we'll be here tracking it and updating you on those impacts going forward.
All the way through early next week. And the key player that's not going to let this one escape out to sea like many tropical systems do, there will be a blocking high up here at many levels, mostly at upper levels, but also extend down pretty far down to maybe 10,000 feet off the ground. That will direct it inland, so it's got nowhere to go. And also, look, some cool air is being drawn in on the backside. We'll talk about that later, because that does have some implications for maybe some snow in the higher elevations of West Virginia.
Maybe a foot or more of snow, and that's only going to add to the power outage concern. Heavy wet snow on leafed out trees, long duration wind.
Yes, this is going to last a long time and have all kinds of effects.
Living up to its expectation, really. Let's go to Kelly now for more.
Absolutely, guys. We've got it covered, of course, on weather.com. I've got it here on the iPad, and look at that. We've got all the computer models in agreement now that we are going to see a major impact here in the Northeast, as you guys were just talking about. We've got the latest advisory, by the way, right on the top of the screen in red, which actually shows you the advisory from the National Hurricane Center, the fact that we've got a Category 1 hurricane with winds right now of 75 miles per hour. You want to track it along with us, you can do that as well. Just click on the hurricane tracker here on weather.com. You can see where it's been, unfortunately, causing a lot of deaths in the Caribbean islands, and now where it's going next, of course, up the East Coast into the Northeast. So you may be worried about some of your friends and family that may be in the path of this storm. You can actually, how many of you are on Facebook? You can actually go to Facebook and sign up for this, My Friends Weather, and then you can actually share information that we're bringing you on weather.com with any of your friends and family that might be in the path of Sandy and how it's going to be affecting them. And of course, we've got the latest tropical update right here on weather.com. And if you do lose your power, by the way, we're here with you on your app as well. The Weather Channel app, you can download it on your pad or on your phone with all the latest watches and warnings concerning Hurricane Sandy, which of course is not nearly done. Reynolds?
Okay, Kelly, thanks so much. Our coverage of Hurricane Sandy continues all weekend long. Now, make sure you tune in tomorrow morning for a special Saturday edition of Wake Up with Al. Stephanie Abrams and Al Roker will be live on the beach in Delaware starting at 6 a.m. Gang's all here. We got you covered. Make sure you stay tuned to the Weather Channel. See you in a few. Okay, welcome back to the Weather Channel. Here's a look at all the places under a state of emergency ahead of Hurricane Sandy's impacts along the East Coast. What do you think, Crystal?
Well, boy, we're talking already, you know, getting prepared for the storm. New York, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, and 33 counties in eastern North Carolina have already declared states of emergency. Governor Christie out of New Jersey will hold a briefing, we understand, tomorrow. You can clearly see New Jersey is not included just yet.
My goodness. And then take a look at the power outages. And you see the area shaded in that reddish-orange color. That's where it's likely. But then notice there's an outlying area also, Crystal, the possible areas.
That's right. You need to prepare now over the weekend for possible power outages as early as Sunday night into Tuesday of next week. We've got a team of hurricane specialists right here, right now, and they say this is the time to prepare for these outages. All the way down into North Georgia, believe it or not, we could have some strong wind gusts.
That is a big stretch of area.
All the way up into New England.
No question about it. The impacts of Hurricane Sandy will be far-reaching, and the effect is going to be over so many people, in fact, 50 million people in the coming days. I'm Reynolds Wolf.
And I'm Crystal Lager. We want to welcome you to this extended edition of Weather Center Live. Our team of veteran meteorologists say they have never seen anything historic like this. Potentially in the making. We want to go ahead and kick things off right now with our hurricane specialist, Dr. Greg Postel. Dr. Postel will get a new advisory by 11 o'clock Eastern. Can you talk to some of the changes you expect to see with that advisory?
I can. And here's what I think. I think based on the satellite images that we've been getting and some of the recon data that we've been getting, I think it will be a tropical storm, much like Brian did earlier, and we all thought that was the case. I think this time they'll finally release it from its hurricane status. Can't say for sure, but been watching the hurricane data. Hurricane hunters are in there, and I haven't seen a wind of hurricane force yet that they've measured. They're in there sampling it, so then of course they haven't gotten everywhere in the storm, so we have to just wait and see. But that would be my guess for what the 11 o'clock advisory would say. Just a little bit, bring it down to maybe 70 miles per hour, but we'll see. Here's the advisory as of 8 o'clock, 75, 970 on the pressure, moving north at 8 miles an hour. Center of circulation is out here, and this is part of what I was talking about. It's really sort of a lopsided system. All the thunderstorm activity is on the north and northeast side of the system, right in here. And we're seeing a very strong jet stream come in from the south that is bringing some dry air. But this is all part of what we expected. This is not unexpected, and it's not going to diminish what we think will happen in the northeast. This is all part of the process of the transition away from being a hurricane, a purely tropical system where oftentimes we see thunderstorms right over where the center is, to one that is involved with a strong jet stream and things are spread out over a much larger area. So this is all part of the plan that the models have been showing us for days. So what I'm going to show you right now is the reconnaissance. The hurricane hunters are in there. One of their passes, their most recent pass, they found their maximum sustained surface wind was only 46 miles per hour and a minimum pressure of 971. So the pressure hasn't changed, but the winds on that pass were a little bit low. On the earlier passes that I saw, they were up to 66, 67 miles per hour. So there are some definitely stronger winds in there. And again, the pressure at 971, that's just showing you that the pressure's not changing, but the wind field is expanding. So the pressure gradient, or the change in wind with distance, is actually going down a little bit, and that's why the wind speed, we think, is going down a little bit as well. Here's the hurricane forecast cone from the Hurricane Center. Moving northeastward, again, as expected. The Hurricane Center has been fantastic with this track all along, and they've moved it toward the northwest, with the center coming on shore very likely on Tuesday, anywhere from southern Virginia to southern New England, but we think the center will more likely be up in here. But again, this will be a huge system impact spread out over a very large area, so don't focus on the center, and I'll show you why. Here are two models that forecasted the center to come on board very close to New York City. One is the U.S. GFS model, which on Tuesday morning at 2 a.m. has the center on Long Island. The European model has the center coming on shore to New Jersey. Very large wind field associated with that all up and down this area, with very strong winds, possibly gusting as much as approaching hurricane force wind gusts, certainly along the coast. So we have to keep that in mind, and this is all part of the forecast. Even though it doesn't look good on satellite imagery right now, this is all part of what we had thought all along. And so, again, New York, southern New England, stay tuned, definitely, for direct impacts early next week. Back to you guys in the studio.
Okay, thanks so much, Dr. Greg. You know, what's one of the big components you have with these things? You've got a lot of wind. And with a lot of wind, it is important to be prepared for days and days of power outages.
Widespread damaging wind for a long period of time. Here's our hurricane specialist, Brian Norcross, with what you need to have right now.
Today is the day to get ready, and this is what you need to do. First thing, when you head out today, get some gas in your car, fill it up, because if the power goes out, those gas pumps may not work. Now let's talk about staying home. The most important thing you've got to have is water, and there are two parts to that. One is you need to have water to drink just in case something happens to the water supply, which isn't likely, but just in case, so get a few bottles of water. The other thing is your refrigerator. Put the water in plastic bags like this and then stuff them in the freezer, every little corner of your freezer. That way, the water will be there when you need it, but also it'll keep your refrigerator colder for longer. Get yourself some food for the rest of the week. Get something the kids will like. Get some bread, things that are non-perishable. You need that. While you're out, get yourself some cash, because the ATMs aren't going to work when the power goes out. Get yourself a first aid kit if you don't have one, just in case. Get yourself some batteries, and be sure you have flashlights. If the power is out for an extended period of time, you're going to need the flashlights in the dark. Now, communications. The cell phone is not likely to be your friend if your power is out for a long time. You know how long your cell phone lasts. So be sure you have a car charger, so at least you can keep it going, assuming the cell service works. If the cell service in your area doesn't work, you need a battery-operated TV or radio. Be sure you have lots and lots of batteries. That's essential. And don't forget the kids. get some games because they may have to be occupied at home for days. One more thing, it's going to be cold after this storm. Be sure you have a blanket. You're going to need that. There are other things you need to be aware of. We have all that on weather.com, so check it out. That's it. Back to you.
Welcome back to the Weather Channel and Hurricane Sandy coverage. Let's first take a quick look, a little respite for a moment. Take a look at New York City. They got cloudy skies, temperatures this hour in the 60s. We expect big changes, obviously, for New York and much of the eastern seaboard over the next several days.
We do, and you know, we've had some beautiful fall color, and I think a good little point to get across is that we're going to lose a lot of the leaves that are on trees. Take your pictures this weekend if you're planning that for your Christmas card, whatever it might be. But most importantly, start planning. Think about what you would do if you lost power for days, if not weeks, really. Widespread power outages seem to be the primary impact in the Northeast.
No question about that. And someone who will give us a great idea about the storm, how strong it will be, when it may affect people, is our own Dr. Greg Postel. Dr. Greg, obviously we've been watching the system. What changes do you expect to see by the time we get our next update? It looks like, at least on the eastern side of the storm, looks like, is that dry air that's advecting in on that side? Is it weakening at all?
That's exactly what's happening. There's dry air that's coming in around on the south side of the circulation. And that's part of, that's what we expected, and that's what the models have been showing would happen, sort of this asymmetric or non-circular storm with a lot of the rain and the bad weather on the northern and eastern side, much like we're seeing right now. But you're exactly right, Reynolds. This is part of the process, and probably my guess is in the next advisory, they may drop it to a tropical storm, but it doesn't matter because whether it's 70 or 75 miles an hour, it doesn't really matter. Let me show you the cone really quickly here, just to show you where the track still is in the Hurricane Center. Spot on with this all along, and they continue to hold this track moving toward the northeast, parallel on the Carolina coast. Now they have it intensifying a little bit, and I'll talk about this in another tropical update in the next one, where they go from 75 to 85 Sunday night, still way out over the water, but parallel to the Carolina coast, and that's going to have some impacts, we think, in the Carolinas in particular with the storm surge. With such a huge wind field, the circulation around Sandy is so large that it's going to be bringing a lot of water into the coastal regions of Virginia and North Carolina, in particular with the storm surge. On Sunday, we have 2 to 4 foot storm surge here in southern parts of Virginia and far northern parts of North Carolina, and 3 to 5 foot storm surge here as well along the Cape Hatteras and the Albemarle and Pamlico Sound. So again, this is going to have wide-ranging effects beginning very soon. In fact, already we're starting, we've seen all the rain and wind on Florida. That's just going to move up the coast over the next couple of days. With that, I'm going to send it back to you guys in the studio.
Thank you, Dr. Postel. And as Sandy makes its way up the East Coast, everyone is watching and waiting in anticipation of what could be a historic storm.
Oh, no doubt. And we're going to take a look at past events and see if they can compare to this particular hurricane. There is no denying it. Sandy is a monster.
With Sandy, we're dealing with a rare and, in fact, unprecedented set of meteorological circumstances. It's almost like we have a hurricane-like feature inside of a nor'easter. Another unusual aspect with this storm is that it's going to take a sharp turn into the northeast United States.
And that turn means landfall somewhere in a heavily populated area. While we don't yet know the full scope of what we're dealing with when it comes to the impacts, we can look to the past for a hint. The best recent examples are Hurricane Isabel and Irene. Isabel was the costliest and deadliest hurricane in the 2003 season. Irene in 2011 was, like both Isabel and Sandy, a large and destructive storm. Both Isabel and Irene also cut a swath through the Outer Banks before doing damage elsewhere. Sandy won't affect the Outer Banks nearly as severely, but will have significant impact on the coast and inland, including flooding and massive power outages.
There were significant power outages with previous storms, Isabel and Irene, and we did learn some lessons about how to deal with that. But this one may even exceed what we saw with those two storms, with many more people affected and potentially many more power outages.
Additionally, New York is currently in Sandy's crosshairs, not unlike Irene at one point. But the worst of Irene's damage ended up north of New York in Vermont. At the time, New Yorkers were on high alert. But will they be this time as well?
My experience is people say they're not going to move the next time when they go through a near miss, but then a huge storm is coming at them. They see it on television, they hear the talk, they get scared, they get concerned, and they move anyway. and I think that's likely to happen with this storm.
And remember, Sandy is potentially a storm of extraordinary proportions.
One of the reasons why this storm is going to be such a big problem is because of the size of the winds associated with it. We could have damaging winds across hundreds of miles of coast along the northeast and moving inland from there.
Which is why it's imperative to take precautions now. Okay, now obviously we have a very busy night ahead. More tropical updates will be coming up.
That's right, and we'll take a look at where the storm is right now and where it's headed next. Cocoa Beach, Florida.
Well, it's 50 past the hour. It's time for your tropical update. I'm hurricane specialist Dr. Greg Cosell with the latest on Sandy and where the storm is going. And let's look at the Hurricane Center's forecast cone. Give you an idea what is likely going to happen. Right now, as of 8 o'clock, this is the latest advisory. It's a 75-mile-per-hour hurricane. That's a minimal hurricane, pressure 970, moving north at 7 miles per hour. Here's the forecast cone that they have outlined for us. And they have it weakening by tomorrow evening as a 65-mile-per-hour tropical storm and moving northeastward. Hasn't made that turn yet, but we think it will in the next 12 hours or so, overnight tonight, I think, and then move northeastward, parallel the Carolina coast. And then notice this, though. Look at these intensities. Sunday evening, a 75-mile-per-hour storm, so it comes up a little bit between Saturday and Sunday. But then here, look, Monday, 80-mile-per-hour Category 1 hurricane with the center moving somewhere inside of this cone. And then, of course, moving northwestward from there, the center very likely moving onshore anywhere in this red area. But again, it's not about the center because this storm will be so big. It will be anywhere in this region that will likely experience significant wind and rain from Sandy because it will be so large. The circulation will be that large. But let me just show you really quickly here what I think part of the reason why it is intensifying in this region, certainly more than it appears to be doing right now. What I put on here is the sea surface temperatures, and unfortunately you can't see the cone very well, but I'll outline it for you. The Sandy's right about here. That's where the center is, and it's over water that's about low 80s, 80 Fahrenheit. It is going to move to the northwest or northeast a little bit here, and I put the cone on here. Unfortunately, you can't see it very well, but it's going to be moving over water that's generally in the upper 70s. But then about Sunday evening, where they have a 75-mile-per-hour minimal Category 1 hurricane, that's forecasted, it turns to the left and moves over this ribbon right in here. This is the Gulf Stream. This is the center of it right in here where the water is warm and flowing like that. So when it moves over, it will move over eventually, late Sunday and Monday, that ribbon of very warm water. That's about when the Hurricane Center has their forecast go up to 80 miles per hour. That may be part of the equation, part of the reason why it does it. It's not everything, of course. There are a lot of ingredients, a lot of variables at play here. There's upper level winds that are going to be strong and in some cases even helping out to intensify the system just a little bit. But this may be one of the pieces of the puzzle why we think it's going from a 75 to 80 mile per hour storm as it moves toward the northwest. Because if you notice thereafter, once it moves over these cooler waters, it's no longer an 80 mile per hour storm when it comes on shore. Still very strong, but not that strong. So that may be part of it, the fact that the water is very warm still for much of its trek as it moves northward across the western Atlantic. So where's the center going to go? Here are two models that show you where the center will likely be Tuesday morning, 2 a.m. The red X is the U.S. GFS model right in here, and these little lines around it, these red lines around it, are the sea level pressures associated with Sandy. So the tighter those lines are together, the stronger the winds. But anyway, that's where the GFS has its center, and this is where the European model has its center at the same time. So they're very close together. That means we have fairly high confidence that the center of Sandy will be in that spot or very close to it early on Tuesday morning. That has significant impacts and different impacts even with regard to the wind and the coastal problems, because if it moves in where the GFS says over Long Island, we're going to have the strongest onshore winds north of the center, perhaps over Connecticut, moving down in Long Island Sound, Narragansett Bay, Rhode Island as well. But if the center is down here, we still have those problems up that way. But now we bring the strong wind and the onshore flow into the south side of Long Island and into New Jersey as well. So, you know, small differences in the outcome will have large differences in the impact, in particular with this regarding the storm surge and the coastal impacts. Not so much in the size of the winds that move on shore, but in the coastal impacts with storm surge. So we've got to keep an eye on exactly where the center does indeed come on shore. And what we think is going to happen is that maybe even on the backside, here's Monday and Tuesday, this is an upper level wind flow. There's Sandy. We think it's going to come on shore likely somewhere in this region like we just showed you. But notice that this jet stream that is just off to the west that is going to be involved with Sandy very soon will bring in some cooler air, this shading right in here. And so we think on the backside over the mountains of West Virginia, there could be one heck of a snowstorm. Perhaps some of the models I've seen have put out 1 to 2 feet of snow in the higher elevations above 1,500 feet, maybe above 2,000 feet over the mountains of West Virginia, Maryland perhaps, and even far parts of far northwestern North Carolina. So there's all kinds of things in play here. We have aspects of a tropical system with the storm surge, aspects of a nor'easter with the winds spread out over very large areas, and also aspects of maybe some small areas getting some significant snow, especially in the higher terrain of the Appalachians. So with that, we'll send it back to you guys back in the studio.
All right, thanks, Dr. Postel. So again, a hybrid superstorm on our hands once we get into the northeast.
Oh, yeah.
Our coverage continues of Hurricane Sandy all weekend long. In fact, tomorrow morning you can tune in for a special edition of Wake Up with Al.
See you in a few.
We start this hour with a new view right now of Hurricane Sandy closing in on the East Coast. This is what Sandy looks like from space, a monster of a storm.
Just tremendous, simply tremendous. Our team of veteran hurricane specialists say now is the time to prepare for an extended period of power outages. We're talking possibly weeks without power for millions of people from the mid-Atlantic to New England and even inland.
We have exclusive expert analysis you will not get anywhere else from the Weather Channel headquarters in Atlanta. This is a special edition of Weather Center Live. As many as 50 million people could feel the effects of Hurricane Sandy in the coming days. Good evening. I'm Crystal Ager.
And I'm Reynolds Wolf. Welcome to this extended edition of Weather Center Live. We've got a lot to talk about tonight. We certainly do, no question.
The threat levels, we're going to take you through this from the south all the way up into parts of New England. We want you to be aware of what's going on across the east coast of Florida because we still have impacts here and will throughout the day tomorrow.
My gosh, look at that. You see the area where you have the alert, we have the awareness, and really it includes virtually almost the entire eastern seaboard in some form or fashion in terms of an alert or the aware areas.
And we've added alert to a good chunk here of the mid-Atlantic and northeast region, and we still have high confidence of an extreme storm with far-reaching impacts in this area. Let's get right to Dr. Greg Postel and find out the latest, what we can expect, Dr. Postel, with Sandy as it moves away from the Bahamas as a Category 1 hurricane.
Yeah, we're starting to see sort of a change in its structure. You know, maybe that occurred, even hints of that it was occurring last night, and it's continuing to show that. It's no longer this really nice circular little storm over a low center of low pressure. The center, actually, the low-level swirl is right about there, and we see this huge cloud field that extends well away from the circulation, and it is lopsided, that is for sure, but that is also what is expected because we have a strong jet stream that is like that atop of Sandy, and that is blowing those thunderstorms off to the north. This is all part of the process of Sandy getting bigger and sort of moving away from being just a tropical system to becoming extratropical in part. So this is the latest advisory, 75-mile-per-hour winds. Based on what we're seeing here from the satellite and some of the reconnaissance data that we get in, I wouldn't be surprised if this number comes down just a little bit, but that doesn't matter. Again, this is all part of the forecast that we've been advertising for a while, as has the Hurricane Center. They expect this to occur. So there's nothing unusual we don't think we'll see in the advisory, maybe a little bit of weakening, but we're going to continue to see, I think, this forecast confidence and, in fact, grow with time because see how each of these lines, they're close together. Each one of these lines is a different forecast of where a different model thinks Sandy's center is going to go, and the fact that they're close together means the models are in agreement that it's going to be moving northeastward parallel to the coast and then turn northward late in the weekend and then head northwestward from there. Look at this consensus of forecasts right in here, bringing it in between New York and Philly. This is the center of Sandy. Of course, the effects will be spread out over a very wide area because by that time it'll be even larger than it is now. So perhaps very strong tropical storm to hurricane force gusts over a wide range area, many states included in that. So here's the timing on Sandy's impacts. Rain chances and winds increasing 20 to 30, gusts to 40, and this area shaded in green on Saturday on the coastal Carolinas. Then we move up the coast on Sunday. Heavy rain, winds 25 to 30, gusts to 50 in this region, and then moving northward from there. This is where the area really expands. Monday and Tuesday, flooding rains, winds gusting to 75 miles perhaps, which will definitely lead to coastal flooding, beach erosion, and widespread power outages. Millions of folks could be without power for days, perhaps even longer. Back to you guys in the studio.
Okay, thanks so much, Dr. Greg Postel. Some of the early impacts of Hurricane Sandy have been some of the immense waves, the strong waves on the shore of Florida.
Our storm tracker, Jim Cantori, has been out there. In fact, he spoke with a man that's been tracking down some uncovered treasures on the beaches of Singer Island, Florida. Take a look.
Well, tonight here on Singer Island, the impacts of Sandy continue to wane, especially in terms of the wind and the rain. This has really died off, certainly from where it was 12 hours ago. The wave action is still huge behind me here, but with that wave action comes a complete change in the beach and sometimes some pretty nice trinkets. I want to go talk to my friend Dean, who's been out here with a metal detector, and really within just a couple of hours, Dean, you have found some stuff.
I've come up with some nice finds. It's when the sand's getting taken away is when it happens.
So tell me about what you find. Show us some of the stuff here.
Well, if you can see here, I've got me a nice grill. A little bit.
Is that solid gold?
Yeah.
Or at least gold plated?
Yeah, gold plated.
So how much is that worth?
To the owner, I guess a lot.
Well, yeah. I hate to be missing that.
Yeah.
Hopefully there's not a body attached to it.
Yeah, I don't think so. But got a little Tiffany and Company here, and
wow, look at that.
Hopefully that one's real. My wife will really love that. And then
how many carats do you think?
I have no idea. Hopefully it's.
It feels heavy though. It's got some weight.
Yeah,
to it.
hopefully it's at least 1.5, 2.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Oh, anytime, man. I need the hat, though.
But a couple of rings.
Couple rings.
I mean, these are like diamond ring, engagement rings.
Well, this one I think is really an older ring. If you can see, I don't know if you guys or people out there can see, but it's kind of a little on the tarnished side. But the diamond looks to be real, along with some pieces of broke gold chains, another pink.
Oh, pink diamond.
And that's a really small target, though. With you get a decent quality detector. I mean, you can find stuff with a regular detector, but you need a good one.
Dean, thanks for talking to me, buddy.
Well, am I supposed to hand you the gold?
I appreciate that. No, he just shake my hand. All right. I appreciate that. Thank you. Obviously, that's what comes with an ocean storm, folks. You can really find some nice finds, and certainly from what Dean's got there, he may be able to pay the mortgage this month. That's for sure. Back to you.
The size of that diamond is pretty impressive,
Not bad.
right?
Yeah, that's a good work.
We have more on Hurricane Sandy coming up. We're going to go live to Delaware to get a report on preps there ahead of Sandy. We'll be right back. 10 past the hour now as we track Hurricane Sandy. We are waiting on the latest advisory from the National Hurricane Center. We'll know a lot more about the current stats on the storm and the path in the next hour or so. So stay tuned. We'll have expert analysis for you. Here's what we know right now as we track Sandy going forward. We expect the storm to, as far as the models are concerned at this point, it looks like the storm will become a Category 1 hurricane before slamming into this area here. Now this cone of uncertainty is projecting where the center of the storm will be. So we still have a wide area to watch for that center landfall from Virginia Beach pretty much all the way into parts of New England. But this is such a large storm that we are going to see widespread, far-reaching impacts. Think about Irene and some of the impacts we had here all the way into Vermont. Now, keeping an eye on Florida, of course, and the weather we're getting right now. We have winds at about 15 to 20 miles per hour. We've had on and off rain. That's what we can expect for the big game tomorrow. Of course, college football with the Gators and the Bulldogs in the afternoon. 75 degrees, chance of rain, and windy at times. So be safe out there. Secure any loose items just in case. Reynolds?
There are a lot of anxious eyes watching Sandy as the storm heads closer to the U.S. Places all along the East Coast are on high alert. Let's go straight to WRC's Erica Gonzalez. She's live in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, with a closer look at preparations ahead of this potentially historic storm.
Reynolds, this is not a sleepy fall weekend at the beach. There are thousands of people here for an annual Halloween festival, which could mean cancellations and long lines as people try to leave this city.
As the waves bombard the Rehoboth Beach shore, it's almost too picturesque to believe an epic storm is headed here. Dubbed the perfect storm, Sandy is no joke. Rehoboth Beach Mayor Samuel Cooper.
Everybody's going to need to take some action, I think. At minimum, bringing your lawn furniture and all that sort of thing. At most would be to evacuate.
Don't wait for mandatory evacuations. Make your preps now to move. That's the word from the Emergency Ops Director of Sussex County to those living in low-lying areas and mobile homes.
It's a beautiful day. It's been beautiful all day long. It's been gorgeous.
But Randy Huber, who's had this vacation home since the 80s, refuses to budge.
If it's going to be as bad as they're saying it's going to be, we'll get out of here, but it's not going to be tonight.
In a matter of days, Sandy could bully Rehoboth Beach and its residents with rampant rain and historic winds.
1962 with a northeaster in March was kind of the storm of record here. And on the worst case scenario, this could be more devastating than 1962 was.
Now, what we know is that their annual costume parade is on schedule for 11 a.m., but city leaders tell us that evacuations and shelter locations could come as early as tomorrow afternoon. Live at Rehoboth Beach for the Weather Channel, Erica Gonzalez, back to you, Crystal and Reynolds.
Okay, thanks so much. That beach is tricky to say.
It is. We've struggled with it all night. Rehoboth Beach. Well, we continue to stress just how dangerous Sandy's winds will be when they start to hit the coast, particularly in the major cities across the Northeast.
That's right, including New York City. And its concentration of skyscrapers in between the buildings, you got to know that a storm's winds can get significantly stronger. Our severe weather expert, Dr. Greg Forbes, explains why this happens.
By sticking up into the wind, tall skyscrapers can deflect the wind and create some accelerations around the buildings. It's what we call a Bernoulli effect. It's kind of like squeezing a tube of toothpaste. That squeezing causes the toothpaste to squirt out faster. We get jets of strong winds. Now, if the buildings are pretty far apart, like in this case, you might not get too much of that squirting effect, but you might get a little bit of an eddy or a little bit of a whirlwind behind the buildings. But if the skyscrapers are pretty close together, you might get a wind tunneling effect because of that squeezing of the air from around both of the buildings in between them. It might get strong enough, in fact, that you might even pull some of the windows out of the buildings and channel some of those strong gusts down to the ground. It's what we call the microclimate within the urban environment. Back to you.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Forbes. And we are covering all of the angles of Hurricane Sandy for you tonight.
That's right. And straight ahead, we're going to give you an in-depth look at what direction Sandy will go when it pushes onto the coast early next week. But first, let's take a look at some of the impacts you can expect with Hurricane Sandy.
From Ocean City, Maryland, all the way into Portland, Maine, we're looking at heavy rain and wind damage. One of the primary impacts will be widespread power outages, we think, across this entire area, plus coastal and inland flooding, also a threat Sunday into Tuesday.
And welcome back to the Weather Channel. We're going to send it over to Crystal and Dr. Greg Postel in the Global Forecast Center for an in-depth look at Hurricane Sandy.
All right, thanks, Reynolds. And right now we're waiting for the latest advisory on Hurricane Sandy from the National Hurricane Center. We should have that out by 11 o'clock Eastern. We're talking about how, you know, this storm may be weakening a bit temporarily, may have a tropical storm on our hands shortly, but Greg, we don't want to get caught up in the classification of the storm because there's so much more to it. So people need to, you know, really take it seriously.
Absolutely. I mean, maybe the winds go down 5 miles per hour in the next advisory. So what? I mean, it's getting bigger. It's getting larger in size. And in fact, I was looking at some observations along the northeast coast. Cape May, New Jersey has a northeasterly wind right in here. So they've got a northeasterly wind. That means the winds are beginning to respond to the pressure, the low pressure, all the way down here. So we've got a circulation that goes all the way around like that already. Now, the winds out there aren't that strong. They're just a few miles per hour up here on the Jersey coast. Of course, they get a lot stronger to the southeast. Let's look at some observations now down in Florida. Here's some buoy reports. Look at that, up to 31 feet with a buoy near where the center of the circulation is, which is actually right about here. Most of the thunderstorm activity off to the north.
So if we're in the Bahamas, the northern islands of the Bahamas, are we in the clear?
Yes.
I mean, we still have some rough surf, some wave action.
Very strong waves, or very high waves, yeah, but the winds will be diminishing very quickly, I think.
All right, but Florida, I mean, you're talking about some of those waves and then the rip current risk. You don't want to be out at the beaches. You always get surfers trying to get out and ride these waves. It's very dangerous.
Very dangerous, especially with those huge waves not very far offshore. Miami winds north at 13, gusts to 25, so weather is getting much better in the Bahamas right now. But notice Daytona Beach still north at 22, gusts to 38. So the wind field is getting bigger, and it's getting bigger up in this region, up in here. So folks along the Carolina coast, keep on the lookout, because I think even though the center of the storm won't get much closer to you, if at all, your winds will likely pick up a little bit, and your chance for showers will increase along the Carolina coast throughout the weekend.
Which is why we have tropical storm warnings out all the way up to the North Carolina coast.
All the way up to the North Carolina coast. But let's talk about the steering as it comes into the northeast, because this is, we've been talking about these, forces coming together, these weather systems that are going to be blending and giving us some unusual and very rare impacts. Now, one of the key players that is going to keep Sandy from moving out to sea, it's not going to let it move out to sea, it's going to bring it inland toward the northwest, is this high pressure system up here, which is both at very high altitudes, also at about maybe 10,000 feet off the ground as well. We have a strong wind flow that is coming in from the east. That is pretty unusual, especially when you have a tropical system in play right here. So Sandy will likely be pulled that direction toward the northwest, in part because of that high, but also in part because of this jet stream right here, which, Crystal, has some very cold air aloft anyway up there. Maybe not so much at the surface, but when you have that there and those strong winds in place, we are expecting some snow to fall in the high elevations of the Appalachians. Seven Springs, Snowshoes, Roanoke, Bluefield. Very windy conditions. Cold aloft, cold enough to snow above probably 1,500 feet. And some of the models I saw dump over a foot, perhaps as much as 2 feet of snow in this. So this is just part of the whole system. It's not only got this tropical part, it's got this nor'easter feel to it. In fact, the cloud looks like right now a developing nor'easter, that we'd see in wintertime. And it's got a potential for this snow in the Appalachians.
I think Brian Norcross called it a hybrid powerhouse earlier. And you think about the power outages, the widespread power outages, whether it be from the damaging winds or the heavy snow. And then, Greg, after we lose power, which we expect in some of these areas, it's going to be chilly. So a lot of people need to be aware of that if they can't heat their homes.
Indeed.
All right, Kelly has more on Hurricane Sandy.
I sure do, guys. This is a huge problem for a lot of my friends and family in the Northeast, but you can track the storm right along with us here on weather.com. I've got it called up here on the iPad, of course. The latest advisory, of course, was at 8 o'clock Eastern, but the next one from the National Hurricane Center comes in at 11, but right there on the top of the screen, right on the homepage, you can actually see the advisory information. You can track the hurricane along with us, and if you actually click on any of these points right here, you can actually see what the wind speeds are going to be at that particular location and exactly where we're tracking it to go next. Of course, we got the latest on the advisories. You can also tell your friends and your family about where the storm is going. Go to Facebook. You can sign up for My Friends Weather, and any advisories or warnings that they need to be aware of, you can actually send it to them courtesy of social media. So that's a wonderful thing you can do there. Also, the tropical update, we have that posted on weather.com. The path, the advisories, who is in the path of this storm, and you can see where we do have those tropical storm warnings in effect, as Crystal and Dr. Greg Postel were just mentioning, right along the outer banks of North Carolina down toward the coast of South Carolina as well. So we've got a long way to go. Our coverage of Hurricane Sandy continues all weekend long.
I'm Tadagolian. My first response team of America has been to dozens of storm sites and helped thousands of people. I depend on one source to track the storm, the Weather Channel, and one truck to get our team and rescue gear to the scene, RAM. There's nothing more rewarding than restoring hope and saving lives. That's why I've partnered with the best. The Weather Channel and Ram trucks. Severe weather never stops. Neither does the First Response Team of America.
And welcome back to the Weather Channel. Here's a look at all the places under a state of emergency ahead of Hurricane Sandy's impacts on the East Coast. What do you think, Crystal?
We're looking at New York already, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, and 33 counties in eastern North Carolina. And Reynolds, we understand Governor Chris Christie out of New Jersey will hold a briefing tomorrow to talk about efforts to prepare for Sandy, as they are not under a state of emergency just yet.
Unbelievable. And, that's not the only thing we're dealing with. We also have other issues in terms of power outages. And I mean, this is something that's just amazing. The width of the storm affecting so many people.
This map shows you where power outages are possible and likely from Hurricane Sandy. So the message we want to get out really is that now is the time to prepare for loss of power.
No doubt about it. And one thing you keep mentioning that's also very important is, remember, this is going to be a long-term event. It's not going to be something that's going to happen overnight. It's going to stretch into next week. Folks, coming up, we're going to share some information from our team of meteorologists who are going to tell you that it is time to prepare for the widespread, prolonged outages from North Georgia all the way to New England. It's going to be a big mess.
Yeah, it could be horrendous for so many people. The impacts of Hurricane Sandy are going to be far-reaching and will affect as many as 50 million people in the coming days. Good evening. I'm Crystal Lager.
And I'm Reynolds Wolf. And welcome to this extended edition of Weather Center Live. Our team of veteran meteorologists say they've never seen anything quite like this potentially historic storm in the making. Let's go ahead and kick things off with our hurricane specialist, Dr. Greg Postel.
Thanks, Reynolds. Yeah, that's right. I mean, we are seeing, this sort of confluence of systems that are going to come together, and in fact are beginning to do that right now in a way that I can't remember seeing. It's involving tropical systems, mid-latitude jet streams, and it's going to bring a whole variety of weather over a very large part of the East Coast, as it is in fact right now. Let's look at the latest advisory from the Hurricane Center. This is at 8 o'clock Eastern Time. Winds are 75 miles per hour, or were at 8 o'clock at the maximum sustained surface wind. We may see that come down a little bit in the next advisory, but again, that is forecasted, and that is not to take away from anything that will be happening down the road, certainly the impacts in the Northeast. Pressure 970 moving north at 7 miles an hour. The center of the circulation about 200 miles east of Vero Beach, Florida. Most of the thunderstorms located off to the north, right in here. That is all part of this transitioning away from being a tropical system now to involving some of the jet stream energy that is pushing those thunderstorms off to the north and helping to spread some of those lower pressures over a wide area. So the pressure, will probably stay the same in the next advisory. I've seen some recon. In fact, I'll show you some aircraft reconnaissance from the hurricane hunters that have been in there flying all day practically, and the latest pressure they found 968. I don't know exactly how that was done, if that's an extrapolated measure or there are some various techniques that they use, but it is right around 970, which was the previous advisory, so I don't expect the pressure will come down in the next one. And the maximum surface wind, though, they did find in this pass was 60 miles per hour, so it is possible. I haven't seen any recon data to suggest that that it would certainly intensify, but I think the winds will come down a little bit to maybe 70 miles per hour in the next advisory. We'll see what they decide to do with that. And here we go. Here are the tracks. Each one of these lines represents a different model forecast where they think the center of Sandy is going to go. This is about where the models think it will be on Sunday evening. And then notice how confident they are in the short period, but also how confident they are in the end, almost the end result here. Very tight clustering across New Jersey, anywhere from New York down to Atlantic City. The models are now honing in on this idea that the center will move across that region, of course, have very wide-ranging impacts along the region when it does make landfall. Strong winds all the way from Maine to North Carolina. So let's break it down, the timing for you. On Saturday, we have periods of rain, winds gusting to perhaps 50 miles per hour all the way from Charleston to Norfolk, Virginia, sustained at 20 to 35. Then on Sunday, we have very widespread effects here. Rain increases, winds 25 to 40 with beach erosion as well. So these impacts will only get wider with time as we move on to Monday. So lots to talk about. Stay tuned. Now is the time to start preparing. Back to you guys in the studio.
One thing that stands out to me is the wind. That's going to be the big thing. The duration of it is going to be tremendous. And, it's important to remember that with that wind, it is important to be prepared for days, possibly, with power outages.
Days, maybe even weeks for some. Here's our hurricane specialist, Brian Norcross. He has more on what you need to have right now to get ready.
Today is the day to get ready, and this is what you need to do. First thing, when you head out today, get some gas in your car, fill it up, because if the power goes out, those gas pumps may not work. Now let's talk about staying home. The most important thing you've got to have is water, and there are two parts to that. One is you need to have water to drink just in case something happens to the water supply, which isn't likely, but just in case, so get a few bottles of water. The other thing is your refrigerator. Put the water in plastic bags like this and then stuff them in the freezer, every little corner of your freezer. That way, the water will be there when you need it, but also it'll keep your refrigerator colder for longer. Get yourself some food for the rest of the week. Get something the kids will like. Get some bread, things that are non-perishable. You need that. While you're out, get yourself some cash because the ATMs aren't going to work when the power goes out. Get yourself a first aid kit if you don't have one, just in case. Get yourself some batteries and be sure you have flashlights. If the power is out for an extended period of time, you're going to need the flashlights in the dark. Now, communications. The cell phone is not likely to be your friend if your power is out for a long time. You know how long your cell phone lasts. So be sure you have a car charger so at least you can keep it going, assuming the cell service works. If the cell service in your area doesn't work, you need a battery-operated TV or radio. Be sure you have lots and lots of batteries. That's essential. And don't forget the kids. Get some games because they may have to be occupied at home for days. One more thing, it's going to be cold after this storm. Be sure you have a blanket. You're going to need that. There are other things you need to be aware of. We have all that on weather.com, so check it out. That's it. Back to you.
All right, thanks so much, Brian. Great tips there. And we will wait for the latest advisory from the National Hurricane Center out within the next 20 minutes or so. Right now, we take you live to Washington, D.C., our nation's capital already under a state of emergency.
Hard to believe. Looks good for the time being, but what changes are coming over the next several days?
As Hurricane Sandy heads toward the East Coast, one issue is the time of year. Many trees have started shedding their leaves and can create a mess of problems once the rain comes. Residents and crews have already begun addressing this issue in towns like Plainville, Connecticut. Here's a report from our Hartford affiliate.
Vin Paggins is hurrying to rake his yard and get rid of his leaves before Sandy makes a wet mess of them, or worse.
Because if they get all wet, then they just stick around, and like I say, it makes a mess and clogs the storm drains.
It's a problem these guys know all too well. Dominic Machini, superintendent of roadways in Plainville, is coordinating crews to step up the leaf collection in an effort to minimize what he says could be a major headache.
Tomorrow we're going to pick up the crews. We're going to put an extra crew on to try to get as much of these leaves picked up before the storm does come in.
But not all towns pick up leaves, and many people still have leaves left on their lawn, or worse yet, left in the street. So public works officials across the state are asking that everyone do their part to clear storm drains whenever and wherever possible.
Our concern is that the leaves will clog the drainage, which then will flood the roads, and in some cases it'll back up into some people's basements.
Mr. Paggins gets it.
Plainville is lowland, used to be a canal here, and you get flooding in these streets all the time because the storm basins that do get clogged.
The citizens are a big factor on this when it comes to a storm like this.
And as far as the winds go, yeah, the winds are going to be blowing the leaves all over the place. You can see those hurricane gusts in the orange, the yellow indicating tropical storm force winds. And we've got ourselves quite the wind event for some of these big cities from Washington, D.C. through Philadelphia on into New York City. Keep in mind, we're not just talking about gusts. We're talking about sustained winds at tropical storm force, perhaps around 30, 40 miles per hour, and even gusting higher than that at times throughout much of southern New England, from Hartford to Providence on up towards Boston and Cape Cod as well. So this is going to be significant, and as you guys know, it's going to be a long-lasting wind event as well. Crystal?
That's right. Enjoy any of those fall leaves that are out right now and be prepared for power outages. As Sandy makes its way up and down the East Coast, up north across the East Coast, everyone is watching and waiting, just anticipating what could be a historic storm.
Exactly. Maybe this is time to compare. We're going to take a look at past events and see how they measure up to this specific hurricane. There is no denying it. Sandy is a monster.
With Sandy, we're dealing with a rare and, in fact, unprecedented set of meteorological circumstances. It's almost like we have a hurricane-like feature inside of a nor'easter. Another unusual aspect with this storm is that it's going to take a sharp turn into the northeast United States.
And that turn means landfall somewhere in a heavily populated area. While we don't yet know the full scope of what we're dealing with when it comes to the impacts, we can look to the past for a hint. The best recent examples are Hurricane Isabel and Irene. Isabel was the costliest and deadliest hurricane in the 2003 season. Irene in 2011 was, like both Isabel and Sandy, a large and destructive storm. Both Isabel and Irene also cut a swath through the Outer Banks before doing damage elsewhere. Sandy won't affect the Outer Banks nearly as severely, but will have significant impact on the coast and inland, including flooding and massive power outages.
There were significant power outages with previous storms, Isabel and Irene, and we did learn some lessons about how to deal with that. But this one may even exceed what we saw with those two storms, with many more people affected and potentially many more power outages.
Additionally, New York is currently in Sandy's crosshairs, not unlike Irene at one point. But the worst of Irene's damage ended up north of New York in Vermont. At the time, New Yorkers were on high alert. But will they be this time as well?
My experience is people say they're not going to move the next time when they go through a near miss, but then a huge storm is coming at them. They see it on television, they hear the talk, they get scared, they get concerned, and they move anyway. And I think that's likely to happen with this storm.
And remember, Sandy is potentially a storm of extraordinary proportions.
One of the reasons why this storm is going to be such a big problem is because of the size of the winds associated with it. We could have damaging winds across hundreds of miles of coast along the northeast and moving inland from there.
Which is why it's imperative to take precautions now.
And coming up, we'll have more on Sandy's current path, where it's headed next, and the latest advisory from the National Hurricane Center.
Absolutely. Straight ahead, we're going to take a peek at all that. But first, let's take a look at Cocoa Beach, right on the Space Coast of Florida, and the view that we have for you there. With the tides rolling in, partly cloudy skies.
We've got some wave action here. The outer bands impacting the east coast of Florida. More on these impacts next.
Well, it's 50 past the hour. Time for your tropical update. I'm Hurricane Specialist Dr. Greg Postel with the latest on Sandy. We are waiting for the Hurricane Center to release their advisory. It has not come in yet, and we are watching the trends in the satellite data and some of the aircraft reconnaissance come in, and they are continuing to come in and show basically the same. Not much has changed. We don't think, perhaps a little bit of weakening, so it may be declassified, and now the latest advisory may come in and show it as a tropical storm, but still, it really doesn't matter. Just a few miles per hour in the wind overall in the big picture. That's expected. That's what the models have been expecting. That's what our forecasts have been expecting. So it's all part of this process of Sandy turning into an extratropical system, or at least a hybrid right now. And what we've got here is the center of circulation is right about here, and there is a strong jet stream that's coming in from the south. It's hooking around like that, and that is spreading everything out in all kinds of directions. In fact, it is part of the process of Sandy getting bigger and no longer relying exclusively on thunderstorms right near the center to control how strong, how low the pressure is. It's got other things involved now that are going to help do that. And what we're seeing right now is kind of this large circulation. In fact, I was looking at some of the surface observations up in New Jersey. Those winds are starting to come around just a little bit. Of course, they're very light, but those winds up there are coming in out of the northeast as well. So we've got a huge circulation already that's about that big at the surface. Of course, the winds out on the edge are not that strong right now, but they are, in fact, close to the coast, the Florida coast, 200 miles away from the center, where there we've seen some wind gusts of 40 to 50 miles per hour all day today. So here's the official cone from the Hurricane Center, moving it northeastward. If it hasn't turned northeast yet, it will very soon, likely overnight tonight. Going to a 75-mile-per-hour Category 1 on Sunday, and then intensifying a little bit, perhaps. A couple of things involved here. Some upper atmospheric conditions becoming a little bit more favorable, going to 80 miles per hour on Monday, but also moving over the Gulf Stream there where the water's there a little bit warmer, and then moving northwestward from there. We've seen some new model runs come in even just in the last half an hour that continue to show that perhaps the center likely coming in to the shore of New Jersey. That's the latest guidance we have. Anywhere here in red, though, is fair game for the center to come in, but keep in mind the effects will be spread over a very large area, and I'll show you to. Let's see if I get to those those graphics right here. Here's some timing for some of the effects along the coast tomorrow. Jacksonville, 40-mile-per-hour gusts of rains primarily along the coast. Conditions improving later on in the afternoon. Of course, Charleston, gust of 45 as well. Then moving up the coast later on in the day, 45-mile-per-hour gusts all along the coastal Carolinas. Here we go. And then tomorrow evening, 60-mile-per-hour gusts, perhaps even possible at Cape Hatteras, 55, maybe in Wilmington, North Carolina. And generally the timing, if you move forward now to Monday, we start to see the heavy rain, the high winds, and the coastal flooding move into a large fraction of the Northeast. Anywhere from Boston and Norfolk, Virginia on Monday, expect heavy rain showers. Winds 25 to 45 sustained with some coastal flooding. And then moving into Tuesday, we expand that area even farther to the west to the Great Lakes. Heavy rains, 25 to 50-mile-per-hour winds, gusts to 75, certainly anywhere near where the center comes in. We expect gusts to perhaps 75 miles per hour and an area of wet snow. Don't be confused. This is for higher elevations, but just because it says wet snow doesn't mean it's not going to be a lot. Some of the models are putting out 1 to 2 feet of snow in the higher elevations of West Virginia, so there could be a significant snow event with very strong winds in play there as well. And then what we're going to show here is one last graph here showing the center of two forecasts for where the center will come in. Now for coastal impacts like storm surge and coastal flooding, it's going to be very sensitive on where exactly the center comes in. So to that extent, it's important to figure out where it's coming in. And I just got the new advisory from Hurricane Sandy. Sandy just came in 75 miles per hour. They kept it the same north at 7, moving north at 7, and the pressure is 969. So Sandy remains a hurricane as it moves slowly northward away from the Bahamas. No change in Sandy in the 11 o'clock advisory. A little surprising to me, but they have all the data. They know better. So 11 o'clock on that, the advisory 75 miles per hour. Let's get back to this graphic and let me show the critical elements to where the center comes ashore. This red X is where the GFS, the latest run of the GFS, thinks the center is going to be. That's important because north of that center, we're going to have that onshore component bringing in a lot of water into coastal locations. European model has the center coming in here Tuesday morning, again with its impacts, strong coastal flooding and storm surge north of where that center is. So really, if you think about the coastal effects, it depends where the center comes on shore. And of course, the larger scale impacts will be spread out over a very large area. We'll have to worry about strong winds, lots of power outages, lots of trees coming down potentially. So we have a lot to keep monitoring, and with that, stay tuned with us for all the latest updates on Sandy.
Right now on Weather Center Live, Hurricane Sandy is closing in on the east coast of the United States. The possibly historic storm will pack powerful sustained winds as it hits the Northeast. Now is the time to prepare for long-duration power outages. It could be days, even weeks, without electricity from the Mid-Atlantic to New England. We are tracking this storm with expert analysis you won't find anywhere else from the Weather Channel headquarters in Atlanta. You're watching a special extended edition of Weather Center Live. And we're very glad you could join us tonight. I'm Kelly Cass. It's now 11 o'clock Eastern, 10 o'clock Central. Sandy could impact more than 50 million people up the East Coast, and we just got the latest advisory from the National Hurricane Center as well. There's a look at where we need to be aware. This is our Sandy Threat Index in the yellow, and this is our newest advisory from the National Hurricane Center as of 11 o'clock Eastern Time. National Hurricane Center keeping it a hurricane at this hour with winds of 75 miles per hour. It is a Category 1 storm, and it's moving very slowly. Note it has slowed down in its forward movement, only at about 7 miles per hour, and it continues to just have peripheral effects along the east coast of the United States, but a direct impact is due along the northeast coast as we get beyond the weekend. All right, we want to head out to our Global Forecast Center. Kim Cunningham is standing by with our hurricane specialist, Dr. Greg Postel. What do you guys make of this new advisory keeping Sandy as a hurricane at this hour? And Kelly, I don't know if we're totally surprised or not. I mean, I think the fact that we're concerned that folks may let their guard down if they hear that it's maybe weakening could be a reason.
That's important. I mean, the idea, if they brought it down to, for example, a 70-mile-per-hour tropical storm, that might, confuse people a little bit, confuse the issue and say, well, it's no longer a hurricane. That's not the issue. This is all part of the transformation that we've been expecting with Sandy. So whether it's a 70-mile-per-hour tropical storm or it remains a hurricane at 75 doesn't matter. The impacts are going to be coming, much like the models have been showing for a long time now. And I just did read the discussion from the Hurricane Center, and Kelly, you were talking about this, is that they didn't find any winds that were supportive in their crisscrossing through the storm that had 75 miles per hour, but they didn't sample everywhere. So there is a possibility that there are some hurricane force sustained winds in there, even though they didn't find them in their reconnaissance. Perfectly valid explanation. So what we've got here, here's the latest advisory to bring everybody up to date. 75 miles per hour, 969 in the pressure. That's actually a little bit lower than it was by 1 millibar, and the center of circulation is right about there, maybe 150 to 200 miles east of Vero Beach, Florida. This doesn't look very healthy on the satellite image. You see most of the thunderstorms are off to the north of the center there, which is right about there.
And Dr. Postel, it's moving north, and it continues to move north now. We're expecting a little bit of a change in direction here pretty soon.
Yeah, we are, and we're starting to see, and that may be part of the reason, or part of the influence of this jet stream that's coming in right now. You can see this has now taken on more of like a comma-like appearance. It's gotten very large. In fact, some of the winds on the northeast coast as far as northern New Jersey have come around out of the northeast. So it's gotten very big, in part associated with this jet stream, and that, as you said, is going to be impacting the steering definitely in the near term. And here's the new cone. So, look at it. This is where it goes.
All right, so it goes northeast, and then it looks like they have it weakening a little bit, then getting a little bit stronger, and at this point, more of a hybrid or an extratropical system, and then coming ashore Monday, Tuesday, it looks like, Tuesday morning possibly in the megalopolis.
Right, and this is a forecast for where the center will come ashore. So basically they're saying anywhere in this red area is fair game for where the center will come in. Now, of course, we know that it is a very large storm, and the impacts are going to be spread out over a very large area. So folks all the way from Maine down to North Carolina will be experiencing significant impacts, very strong winds. And in fact, probably there'll be plenty of wind gusts of 70 to 75 miles per hour. I wouldn't be surprised with this, with a lot of rain and coastal impacts. Flooding storms, especially just to the north of where the center comes in.
I mean, it's possible we could have tropical storm force winds extending out over 300 miles.
Indeed. From the center in one direction.
In one direction, right. All right. Thank you, Dr. Postel. We'll have you back in about 5 minutes. Back to you, Kelly.